Good morning. On this Saturday, we look at Ezekiel 27, 28, and 29. And Ezekiel 27 and 28 are both about the city of Tyre. Tyre was a city of commerce, a city of great trade. It talks about the commerce from the east to the west and all of the places that it impacted. Like for an awful lot of years when I was growing up, McHenry didn't have a whole lot, but you'd go to one of the larger cities around, New Rockford or Carrington or maybe Jamestown or Fargo once in a while, like New Rockford and Carrington, they're still cities of commerce, but not quite what they were, quite a few years ago. And some of the other larger cities, from years ago, have just kind of remained what they are. But Tyre was one of those that continued to grow. And chapter 27 kind of starts out with it's a lament against the prince of Tyre. And then it goes to a lament about the king of Tyre. Because this city has grown. And it has mercenaries. It has soldiers. It has power. It is respected. And not only for the commerce, but for its military powers. And, as we look through, some of what is written here, it appears to me that the prince and the king considered themselves gods, which often they did. Even, Napoleon, Bonaparte was, kind of thought of himself as God, as invincible, as all powerful, and they're not. And God reminded this prince and this king that, they are not God. And the lament is that all of the beauty of Tyre, all of the prominence that it has, and the people that make their living there, and the trade center that it is. If you needed something, and if you couldn't get it there, you couldn't get it. And it was, but the rulers kind of started thinking too much of themselves, and forgot. Whether they, knew God. They weren't Israelites. They weren't. They were at least familiar with the God of the Israelites, but they definitely didn't worship him and considered themselves as gods. And, the city of Tyre is kind of referred to as, I guess chapter 28 is the one that talks more about the prince and the king, but chapter 27 is referring a lot of it to Tyre as, as a ship, and how it, it's out on the sea and it's cruising and it's, elegant, and it is. It was a wonderful city. But, the allegory is that, the ship will sink. And, the ship doesn't sink because of the water around it. The ship sinks because of the water that gets into it. And that's kind of what God is saying to the people of Tyre. You've got a beautiful city, you've got a beautiful ship, you've got a beautiful place, but it's corrupt. It's corrupt. It's got holes in it. It's leaking. It isn't being... it's not a sturdy and safe ship because it's not built on a good foundation. We don't often think of a ship as having a foundation, but it does. The keel and everything, every part of a ship has to work together. If there are some rotten timbers inside, it's not going to be, able to withstand the beating of the waves upon it, and it will go down. And so the picture here is of this fine ship, but it's going to sink. And that's the fate of Tyre. Tyre with its prince and with its king and with all of its power and with all of its opulence and all of the respect that it has from so many other areas. And it would be the city to live in. It's just, we kind of have this idea here in, out in rural North Dakota that, boy, there's just not much for me out here in Glenfield, North Dakota, for example, or whatever little town you might live by. And we have to go to the big city to make it. And this was Tyre. This was Tyre. And, and in the New Testament, in the book of Philemon, the slave runs away to the big city so that he'll be able to be lost in all of the hustle and the bustle, and he'll be able to make something of himself, and never be found. But to make something of yourself. This was the opportunity of Tyre. And but God says through the prophet Ezekiel, the lament, the mourning, the crying, the wailing and the weeping is not for its opulence, for what it is, but for the fact that, these people don't know and worship God. And that because of that, we're going to find out as we read these chapters that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon will come and will, after the siege of Jerusalem and the capture of Jerusalem, as was talked about, I think it was just yesterday, King Nebuchadnezzar then goes and besieges Tyre. And Tyre, this great city, falls. This king and this prince who think that they are God find out they're not. And I think that's a lesson for every person. Every person that's alive today or that has ever lived or will live in the future. No matter who you are, no matter how good you are, there's always somebody a little bit better. And, and you can, maybe you want to compare some great sports star or some, like Einstein or Alexander Graham Bell or some of these, nuclear physicists. Nobody is smarter than so-and-so. Well, a person with a super high IQ might have absolutely zero common sense. So a person with good common sense in many ways is going to be able to outdo that person with a massive IQ. So it doesn't matter who you are. And this is what the king and the prince forgot, that they're not God. They're just normal human beings. And that's, I think, a lesson that we really learned from King Solomon as well. When Solomon was going to become king, God asked, what would you want? Riches, and he asks for wisdom. This was, the riches wouldn't make who he was. All of the power, in the world, if he was the king of the whole world, but to have wisdom and to have then the wisdom to know that God is God and I'm not, and so that's a part of one of the lessons, and we learn that lesson so often in the Bible, as many of the lessons are. So Tyre, this great city of commerce, this center of trade, the hustle and bustle and everything that's going on, will no longer be the power that it is at this present time, as Ezekiel talking. And a part of this is the lament, the mourning for, what could be rather than what will be. And then in chapter 29, we covered a lot of years in chapter 29, because it starts out in the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came. And then in verse 17, in the 27th year, in the first month, on the first day. So there's, 17 years that, and so there's a lot that goes on, and we're going to, hear about that other places. But, there's a gap. But within this is the word of God comes, mortal, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And, Egypt and Israel were kind of at odds a lot, like Iran and Iraq, or like North and South Korea, or, so many areas in the world yet today have this animosity. And Egypt is one of those. But, God says to Ezekiel, say to the Pharaoh of Egypt, I am against you. Oh, I mean, man, if someone was to tell me that God was against me, what hope would I have? And, there is no winning against God. There is winning with God. But anyway, Egypt is going to fall. And, it says, verse 8, I will bring a sword upon you and will cut you off from humans and animals, and the land of Egypt shall be a desolation and a waste. And then again, then they shall know that I am the Lord. And, it just puzzles me as to how God was so involved in the world and what was going on, but yet people couldn't see it. But then I think about today. I mean, yeah, it isn't any different today. That God is in the world, but so many people can't see it. And then in verse 13, there's again after 40 years. So I mean, this number 40 pops up so often in the Bible. 40 years the Israelites were in Egypt. 40 years, or not 40 years, 400 years. 40 years they wandered in the wilderness. 40 days of rain. Jesus was in the wilderness, but it's that reminder that timing is important. But yet, the most important thing is to remember that God is God of all time, of all people, and that God is always good.